Last month, I brought back my Paranormal Encounter series. I had a lot of fun putting that video together, and as it currently sits, it was the best performing video from the whole month. So, here we are with Volume 2. I spent a lot of time finding the best and creepiest stories for this one, so I hope it doesn't disappoint. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember, you can send in your own story to my subreddit, r/slumberreads, or my email that can be found in the description if you'd like to have a story featured. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. This isn't a long story, but for it to be effectively told, I need to provide a bunch of context, so excuse the length of this post. I have other stories, so hopefully I can learn to condense as I continue to try and put my memories into words. Anyways, I don't know how many of you will remember this, but in the summer of 2003, there were widespread power outages in the northeast region of the United States, plus parts of Canada. I was 11 years old, and was living with my grandma in an old suburb of Staten Island, New York. Because of this story, I'll always distinctly remember those 2 to 3 days without power. At the time, my family had just recently moved into a new house, and had probably only been there for a few months. The house was old, probably built in the early to mid-1900s. As soon as we moved in, we immediately felt something in the house. Cold spots, random noises, shadows, voices, etc. We realized that the house was haunted, but we never really felt that we had to leave because of it. My grandma and mom are sensitive to spirits, and we lived in other haunted houses before, so we were kind of used to it. Our ancestral house in the Philippines was much worse, so we really weren't in a rush to move so quickly after just moving in. In this house, I only ever saw shadows and heard voices, while my grandma and mom saw full body apparitions. That is, until the blackout happened. So one night during the blackout, it was hot as hell. The temperature was probably in the high 80s and low 90s with no air conditioning due to the power outages. So I asked my grandmother if I could sleep in her room since it was on the 3rd floor, in the coolest part of the house. She obliged, and I fell asleep next to my grandmother after playing Pokemon on my Game Boy under the covers for a few hours. I was woken by a strange voice in the middle of the night a few hours later, probably around 1 or 2 a.m. It was freezing cold, so cold that I forgot about the power outage and thought that the AC was on. The noise sounded like a distant wailing, kind of like really high-pitched police sirens if it was a block away. It was loud enough to wake me, but somehow still sounded really far away. At this point, I'm not really thinking much of it since the window is open, and I assume the noise was coming from outside. I'm still under the covers and wide awake, so I grab my Game Boy and start playing Pokemon in silence so that I don't wake my grandmother. I was obsessed with the game. As I'm playing, I noticed the noise getting louder and closer. This continued for another minute or so until I start to get really annoyed. Just as I was about to pull the covers off to investigate, I feel a weight shift on the bed and hear the mattress spring squeak by the foot of the bed. I look over to check if my grandma was still there, or if she somehow left without me knowing. She didn't. She was still right there. I slowly peek out from under the covers and see a pale-skinned woman with long, dark hair sitting by the foot of the bed. She was wearing a light-colored dress and faced towards the wall. Her hands were pressed against her face and eyes, and she was crying, which I now realize is the noise I had been hearing. I was terrified and shaking, so I turned to wake my grandmother, but I realized she's already sitting up and praying the rosary in silence. She then turned to me and said, "Don't worry. She won't hurt you. She visits me every night." I'll never forget it. I was freaked out and just shut my eyes until I fell back asleep. Anyways, after that night, I never slept in my grandmother's room again. I continued to feel a presence in the house, but I never heard the wailing or saw the woman again. My grandmother, on the other hand, said that the woman continued her nightly visits until we moved a year later. So, I'm a security guard at a distribution center, and I work 3rd shift, which happens to be night shift, 2100 to 0500. I work with 3 other guards and we cover the span of the whole facility. Now, Monday through Thursday, it's staffed 24 hours, with Friday and Sundays, everyone but security leaves by 17:30. This incident occurred tonight, 6/26/20, at around 22:42. I'm currently watching the gatehouse checkpoint, watching videos and generally doing whatever to kill time. I get a call on my radio to perform a perimeter sweep as another guard picked up something on camera and thought maybe someone is in the yard. I leave the gatehouse and look around. Nothing. I report back saying area is clear and go back to playing on my phone. I get a call again, this time by one of the motion detection cameras aimed at the doors. I get up and walk to the warehouse and check all the doors, locked and secured. I call back to report in, and when the other guards respond, I hear a loud woman scream coming from his end. We all heard it and thought that maybe someone from the warehouse was still here and got hurt. I run inside and go to the security desk and see the desk guard looking at cameras and badge in logs to see if he can find anyone who entered or seen anything. We cleared the building at the start of the shift, so it should be empty. We see nothing. By now the other guards showed up asking what the hell was the scream on the radio. I know I'm both freaked out and confused, and I can see the other guys are as well, but none of us are ready to say, must be a ghost. We call the facility manager that we heard a woman scream, and there isn't anyone here, but that we know about it, and we are going to investigate. So we break off into pairs as per procedure when investigating unknown noises during the night, and clear the warehouse, office section, parking lot, dockyard, everything. We found nothing. We call the manager to report it's all clear. One of the guards thinks that maybe someone was pulling a prank, and they happen to pick up on the radio signal, or maybe someone from internal security took a radio and is trying to scare us. That doesn't make sense as the scream clearly came from the desk guard's radio. Well, he was talking. I don't know. I'm a firm believer of paranormal, and I heard rumors that staff members have died in the warehouse, but I never actually looked into it. If they're just your common workplace ghost stories, or actually legit. Figured I'd share this incident while it's still fresh in my mind. Update. So I asked around internal security and first shift employees about any unusual or paranormal activities. Approximately 5 years ago, a staff member had a heart attack in the break room, and another staff member was killed as a result of a workplace accident that involved one of the trailers. I wasn't able to get any more information due to privacy. When I was 16 years old, I started working at a Subway sandwich shop a few miles from my house. It was in a fairly decent neighborhood with a fire station across the street. However, that didn't stop me from feeling uneasy when taking out the trash in the dark by myself at 10 p.m. When I first started working there, everything was going great. I made a new friend and enjoyed going to work. We were pretty short-staffed, so besides the 2 managers, it was just myself and my coworker Jackie. Being so understaffed, Jackie opened the store and worked until 4 p.m., and I closed the store, working from 4 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. At first, nothing big happened. I always felt uneasy when I was alone, but nothing I couldn't ignore. And then small things started happening. The doorbell. It would ring whenever the front door opened to let you know a customer came in. It would go off when the door was shut and locked. On our shelf in the back, we had bags of sauce, and those would slide off the shelf and onto the floor. Even when they were a foot away from the edge, things would randomly go missing. There was a door in the back that led outside where you could go and take a smoke break, and there would always be someone or something knocking on it. I would see small shadows over the corner of my eye all the time. It was mostly small things, but then it started getting worse. One night around 9:30, my friend came to visit me at work. We were standing there talking when all of a sudden she freezes up and goes, "Did you hear that?" Right as I was about to tell her I didn't hear anything, this big gust of freezing cold air goes right in between us, and we hear a growl from the back. She got scared and left. But I had to stay as I still had an hour left on my shift. I was already freaked out, so I called the general manager's son and begged him to close for me. He didn't believe in ghosts or anything, so he was pretty annoyed when I called. But he ended up coming anyway. When he got there, he came in through the back door. I told him what happened and he told me I was seeing things as we walked to the front of the store. Right when we got there, He froze and was staring at the window. The entire front of the store was all window. And when I looked, I saw it. There were hundreds of child-sized handprints, all the way up to where nobody could even reach. I asked him if he finally believed me, and he just nodded. I quit the next day. This one happened when I was 3. We had gone to see a house that we were about to buy. It was sort of the deal finalizer, and I hadn't seen it yet, so they brought me with. The house was built in 1912 and had multiple owners, but had been left vacant for the last 3 years, and was done up to be sold. The tour, I think, went great. I obviously can't remember much of it. And like a 3-year-old child, I was a bit energetic, so I was running about, and I got to the stairs, and I wasn't allowed to go downstairs on my own, but for some reason, I went midway down and waved to an empty room. They asked me who I was waving to, and I said, the man in the bed eating ice cream. They came down and looked, and there was nothing there. And it was getting to the end of the tour, so they picked me up, me still waving to the room now, saying bye-bye. They passed it off as just child nonsense, until after we had moved in. And my mom was discussing to her work colleagues, and one of her friends asked where the house was. My mom said the street name, and one of them said, that's crazy. I used to live on that street. And that's when the woman asked what number it was. My mom said the house number, and she said that was her house that she grew up in, and that her dad had passed away in it 4 years ago. My mom then put 2 and 2 together, and realized what actually happened when we visited it. Essentially what happened was that her dad had lung cancer, and when he got really weak, he lived in the room downstairs because he couldn't walk up the stairs to go to bed, and his favorite thing to eat due to the pain was ice cream, as it soothed his throat, and he died in that room. I've now moved out of that house, but I was never scared in it. I really loved that house actually, and I don't think that his presence was there to cause trouble. I would move into it again in a heartbeat if it went up for sale. Back when I was in college, I dated a guy whose childhood home was very close to the university we both attended. Now this house is a part of a historical home district in the south, where if a home is of a certain age, you are not allowed to change it or destroy it. Any updates must be approved by the city, and retain the historical integrity of the home. All to say, this house was essentially almost the exact same since it was built in the 1800s. Now, we would often go hang out at this house to visit family, and would sometimes stay over to keep his dad company, knowing I love ghosts and a good history lesson. He had informed me that growing up, the family had seen ghostly apparitions and experienced a few things themselves. So before I start my story, I will explain a few of the others from their perspective. The way the home was built, there was the kitchen and living space downstairs and the master bedroom. There was a second story that involved a tiny wooden staircase that led to a long hallway with a bedroom to the left at the top of the stairs, a bedroom almost exactly in front of the stairway exit, and then a bedroom to the right at the far end of the hallway. The bedroom on the far right was mostly used for storage, and that's it. He informed me he and his sister would sometimes see an apparition in this room of a woman in 1800s fashion clothes, hair in a bun, full bottom petticoat, etc. And she would always be looking out longingly through the window in that bedroom. If approached, she would always disappear. The second story was one that my ex and his mother had experienced. His mother unfortunately passed away from an illness, and at this time, she was progressively getting sicker. I say this because, as some people say, the closer you are to birth or death, the easier for you to see or relate to spirits. Anyway, the ex was stopping by his home to pick up some items and just run in and out. He had parked his car on the driveway that was visible from the windows when in the sitting room. He ran in, grabbed his stuff, saw his mother in the sitting room and said hello. He made it to his car with his items and got back in when his mother called him on his phone, asking him, "Why didn't you tell me you had a guest with you? You should know better than to not introduce a guest when you bring them over." It's the South, traditions and such. He was confused and had no idea what she was talking about. He asked back, "What do you mean? It's just me here." To which she replied, "No, there's a girl sitting in your passenger seat. I can see her right now." To which he then noped the hell out of his vehicle and went back inside. There was also always random bangs and noises that one always chalks up to living in an old house. However, whenever we would stay over, I would always have the same dream of what looked like someone in the shape of a man that looked like a black shadow always standing at the edge of our bed. Now, this is the real incident I experienced on my own. One day when I was attending class, I had realized I forgot to print out something for a presentation, and as I mentioned his house was close by to the school, I checked with him to see if it was okay if I ran back to his dad's home and printed off my assignment there. He said there was no issue, and that his dad was actually in a business meeting, so he wouldn't even be home, so I wasn't bothering anyone. I rushed over to the house and up the stairs to the bedroom which had the printer in it. I happened to close the bedroom door for some reason and get on my laptop and began trying to find the assignment and print it out. While I was sitting and waiting on my printout, I began to hear someone walking downstairs. I was confused as no one should be home. So I called my at-the-time boyfriend and asked if he was home. He told me no, that he was on his way to class. I asked if his dad maybe came home, to which he replied his dad was just going into the meeting and he had just talked to him. As we were on the phone, I heard the noise from downstairs begin to head my direction, and I heard footsteps clearly stomping up the stairs. Now I got scared, but possibly thinking someone had broken into the home, and I had just happened to be there. I told my boyfriend to stay on the phone with me. I heard the footsteps get to the top of the hallway, and all of a sudden stop outside of the door of the room I was in. I freaked out, ready to run or attack. One of the two. I opened the door to no one standing there. Absolutely no one was in the house. I then grabbed my assignment. I've probably never ran so fast in my life. This story is true. This story has only been told to a handful of friends and family. It still haunts me to this day. You can call me R. I'm a 21-year-old girl who is all too familiar with the paranormal world. Of all my stories I will eventually share with you all, this one is the beginning of it all. My parents divorced when I was 5 years old, and this led me to live in 2 separate homes. My father, with his newfound freedom, had multiple girlfriends, leading me to bounce around different houses over the years, so I was never in one place for too long. When I was around 7, I developed severe insomnia. I would stay up into early hours of the morning watching reruns of Robot Chicken and Family Guy, until I eventually succumbed to sleep. On one particular night, as my show played on my TV, a spider crawled across the screen. Even at 7, I was not one to leave a spider be. I couldn't rest knowing one was in my space. I grabbed toilet paper from the bathroom, took care of the spider, and crawled back into bed. As I was starting to fall asleep, I felt a vibration from under my bed and thought nothing of it. With my eyes still closed, I could feel and hear the running of fingers slowly moving over the metal bars under my bed. A slow thump as if someone were walking by a fence running their fingers over the bars. At this point, I was once again wide awake. Clearly something was under my bed. But we didn't have a cat or a dog, and there was absolutely nothing beneath my bed. So I waited, frozen in fear, hoping that I could just close my eyes and forget about what may be under there. But no, my hopes were not answered. This time the hand was aggressive while running the full length of my bed, causing an audible noise and shaking of the bed. I was panicking. I was 7 and absolutely not equipped to take whatever monster was waiting for me. But being the brave spider killer I was, I looked over the side of the bed. Nothing. But then, to anyone's worst nightmare, there was something. It was the crown of someone's head. It slowly began moving in a non-human way, moving out from under the bed, little by little, eventually exposing only the head. It was me. But when I say it was me, it also wasn't. It was ghastly. By the light of the television, I could see the knots and greasiness in the hair. The skin complexion was almost translucent, revealing dark blue veins that covered its face. The lips cracked and dried beyond repair. But the most haunting visual was its eyes. They were the palest shade of blue with a stare of 1,000 yards that has been burned permanently into my brain. I stared in utter fear. I couldn't move, couldn't make a sound. What seemed like a lifetime wasn't more than 10 seconds. I screamed, absolutely screamed my head off until my dad rushed into the room. Well, he turned on the lights in panic, not knowing what was going on, nor what to do. I was still frozen in fear. He didn't listen to me, said it was a dream in my imagination as a parent would, eventually tucking me in once again to sleep for the night. I left the lights on and prayed to whoever was listening to keep the monster away. What did I witness? The years passed, but I've never forgotten. I still sleep with the TV on. My bed isn't even a foot off the ground, and I medicate myself to sleep all in fear of the possibility of it returning. I feel the need to frame this up a little. I'm not one to jump to paranormal explanations, even when my very logical mind can't find another answer. I'm not spiritual. I don't get vibes from objects or places. I've never seen a ghost, and I'm overall skeptical about all supernatural activity. All that being said, there is one event in my life that I can't explain. This happened 8 years ago, about 6 months after I had moved to Kansas City after grad school. It was mid-afternoon on a perfect fall weekend, with the weather nice, so I had the front and back doors open with the screen doors shut and all the curtains open. The house was a small 2-bedroom rental that I moved into while I settled into my new job and allowing me time to find a more permanent home. The living room, dining room, and kitchen were in a shotgun-style open concept, with the bedrooms and bathroom to the side. Off the kitchen was a door to the unfinished basement that I can only describe as dungeon-esque. I never went down there, mostly because I never had a reason to, but also because it would rate 10 out of 10 on anyone's creep meter. I was sitting in the living room watching TV with my 2 dogs. Boxer, an English Mastiff, not relevant, just adorable, when I noticed a housefly buzzing around. I didn't think anything of it given the weather, and I had been in and out of the house a few times that day. A few minutes later, I see another fly, then another, then another. Annoyed, I get up to find a fly swatter when I notice several more flies in the kitchen and dining area. I started looking around the kitchen thinking I had left something out to spoil. I opened every cabinet and even used a flashlight to check the very back. I checked the screen door and windows and even looked down the basement stairwell. Nothing. When I turned back towards the living room, I realized the entire house had filled with flies. I'm talking hundreds, probably thousands of common house flies in a matter of minutes. I was stunned. The sound alone was furious and intense. The sight was dizzying, almost hypnotizing. It's hard to describe what it felt like surrounded by all those flies. It was sensory overload. Hundreds of dots zipping around, the noise, the vibrations. I was trying to comprehend what was happening and what I was going to do. I was momentarily in shock, confused, dazed, and overwhelmed. My heart started to race as all I could think was, what am I going to do? I couldn't figure out where they were coming from, spawning from, and I didn't know how I was going to get them out of the house. I decided to lock up the doors, jump in my car, and drive the 1/4 mile down to the corner pharmacy. Normally I would walk, but I drove that day. During the 3 to 5 minutes I was gone, I called my mom to tell her what was happening, and she seemed concerned. I returned home with a box of bug foggers. When I opened my door, I was not expecting the scene that was waiting for me. All the flies, every single one of them, dead. They were all over. On the table, sofa, countertops, floor. I've never seen anything like it. I vacuumed and wiped down all the surfaces, but I found dead flies all over the place the rest of the time I lived there. I'm still not sure what to make of those 10 minutes of my life. Has anyone ever heard of or experienced anything like this? Could this be paranormal, or is there a logical explanation? What do you think it could be? A few notes. I don't recall the dogs acting abnormal, but I also wasn't paying much attention. They were in the house the entire time, even when I was gone. My mother, who was much more spiritual than I, was always freaked out by that house. She told me after I moved out that she would hear voices when she would visit me, including one that would mimic my father's voice. I asked my mother years later if she remembered this phone call, in case I dreamed this whole thing. She remembers it. I had other experiences in that house, including things moving around from where I left them, cabinet doors open when I would return home, lights on and off, etc. The entire year I lived there. I always explain those away, but haven't experienced it anywhere else I have lived. I never felt threatened in the house, even during the fly fiasco. It was years before I ever told this to anyone because I didn't want to acknowledge it ever happening. As years have gone on, all I want are answers of what happened that day. Last night, my mom randomly said, "What did you say, son?" while I was watching TV. I never said anything and told her this. Then a few minutes later, she says, "Josh, did you just call for me?" Again, I was silent. Didn't think anything of it until now. Fast forward to this morning. My mom had something playing on the TV I could hear from my room. So I yelled and said, "Hey mom, what are they talking about on your TV?" I got a clear response. "If you want to hear it, come in here and watch it." The show really caught my attention. I kept listening, and I then said while laughing, "Mom, what did that guy just say?" This time my mom gets an attitude and says, "I'm trying to hear this. Come in here if you want to watch it." I get out of bed to watch it with her. I start talking to her as I'm entering her room, only to notice she's dead asleep snoring. Clearly she's been asleep for a while. She goes, "Damn, Josh, why'd you wake me up?" After I told her what I heard, she tells me she wasn't watching TV and had fell back asleep a while ago. She goes on to say, "I kept hearing your voice repeatedly call out Mom last night. That's why I kept asking what you wanted." The voice I heard clearly sounded like my mom's, and the voice she heard was clearly mine, so I'm a little freaked out and don't know what to think. Any idea what's going on? The only experience that really had me wondering if I'd saw a ghost or a spirit was back in 2008. I was living off an old dirt road in a small town in Michigan. The house I was living in was an old farmhouse. It definitely looked like it fit the bill for being haunted. As a skeptic of the paranormal, I never really paid much attention to the idea that it might have been haunted. Until one night a friend and I were standing in the mudroom when all of a sudden, the blinds on the doors leading into the house split, as if someone was standing there, looking out towards us. I immediately thought that it was one of my family members checking to see who was in the mudroom. It was pretty late, and they might have heard us shuffling around in there, and were checking to make sure that the house wasn't being broken into. When I approached the door to show that it was just me out there, and that the place wasn't being broken into, I noticed that their eyes were staring right through me, as if I wasn't even there. I waved my hand in front of their eyes, and they didn't even flinch. Even as a skeptic, this spooked me. All of a sudden the blinds snapped back shut, and the deadbolt on the door locked. My friend and I were both kind of curious to know what just happened. We had to walk around to the front door, which was unlocked, went in, and asked the only people awake if they had locked us out. They swore that they hadn't even been downstairs in hours, and that it wasn't them. The only other people in the house were asleep. I asked them the next morning if they had come down and locked us out, as a joke. They swore as well that they hadn't even been downstairs since before they went to bed. As a skeptic, it's hard for me to place it in the realm of the paranormal. However, I know that if one of my family members were to play a prank on me and lock me out, they wouldn't have walked away and left me out there. They would have come back, unlocked the door, well laughing and just saying, "Kidding." It's also hard for me to believe that they would be able to stand there staring without a flinch as I wave my hand in front of their eyes, looking through me as if I was a ghost. That experience, combined with multiple other stories from friends and family, saying that they had seen people walking up and down the stairs when there was nobody else there but them, definitely leaves me a bit curious as to what was going on in that place. I've had a few ghostly encounters during the course of my life. This is one of them. I used to live in an old house that was built in 1890 by a doctor and his family. My 98-year-old, still super healthy and sharp, landlady was the doctor's youngest daughter. The rest of the family had been dead for many years. I had been living in the house for 8 years without any encounters. Creaking sounds and flickering lights are normal in such an old house, right? One day I broke my rib right at the spine while sledding. I was in so much pain. I didn't know how to breathe, how to move. Even laying in bed was the most painful thing ever. I was crying and panicking. and thought I might have ruptured my lungs as well because I had such trouble breathing. So the first night I took strong pain meds to help me sleep. It was a rough night. I was tossing and turning, and the sharp pain woke me up every time I moved. In the middle of the night, after I thought I would die of pain, I saw 3 figures standing next to my bed. A tall, handsome man in a black evening attire and a top hat, an elegant lady in an 1890 style gorgeous ball gown, and a young boy, maybe 5-ish, who was wearing a blue kid sailor suit and holding a white ball under his left arm. They were just standing there, warmly smiling down on me. The lady reached out her gloved hand in my direction, and all of a sudden, I sensed the feeling of peace and calmness, and I definitely knew everything would be alright. I smiled back at them and instantly fell asleep, not waking up until next morning. My last thought was, wow, those pain meds are insanely strong. I'm hallucinating. A couple of days later, my landlady checked in on me and asked how my rib is healing. I told her I was still in pain but doing much better, and that I wasn't taking my pain meds anymore, because they made me see people the first night. Although I was brushing it off as a side effect of the meds, she seemed very interested in my experience and asked me tons of questions about how they looked and what they did. A week later, she checked in on me again. This time she brought a framed black and white photograph and just handed it to me. I was stunned. The picture showed a tall man in a dress coat, an elegant lady, and a young boy smiling warmly into the camera. Those were the same people I saw in my room. The people who built, lived, and died in our house. My landlady's parents and her brother, who died at the age of 10, in the same room I was sleeping in. She told me I wasn't the only one who had seen them. Apparently, they appear whenever someone is sick and suffering and just comfort them. She told me about 6 other tenants who had seen them while being sick and in pain. They seem to have been especially active after World War II, when the house became a shelter for refugees. One tenant had only seen the doctor holding her hand and soothing her. Another one saw the little boy staring curiously at him, which freaked him out and made him call the priest. And the others all saw the entire family, well, being wounded. This was going on since the mid-1940s, after her parents died. She told me that her parents were very kind and caring people. Her dad always treated the poor without taking any money. To him, being a doctor and healing people was more than just a job. Her mother helped him as much as she could as a nurse, and by being very compassionate with his patients. My landlady likes to believe they are still around, in their house, looking out for the ones in need, and I'm inclined to agree. Thank you for taking care of me. I've been sharing this true story with friends for years. Always been told it's interesting. Thought I'd share it here. So I've never been the kind of person to believe in ghosts. I'm not a religious guy, but I've seen some odd things in my 26 years, but nothing to convince me 100% that the paranormal is legit. However, I have one interesting experience that tends to get interest, and honestly, has made me question my stance on the paranormal ever since. About 6 years ago, I was a 20-year-old student living in London. My latest flat contract had run out, and I needed a place to live ASAP. I had very little money, and felt guilty needing my parents to be a guarantor. So, as any broke Londoner would do, I googled the cheapest place possible, somewhere I could move into that day, or the next day. That's how last minute this was. I was fortunate, or in actual fact, misfortunate, to find a place available to move in that day. Contract signed, I had a place to live. I moved into this detached house with all my stuff the following day. It was a dirty house, but the flat occupants were all 20 to 30-year-olds. 4 of them, and very friendly. The area was quiet, and I felt reasonably comfortable. Weird noises and objects moving. The house was always damp and cold. It was autumn, so it's not surprising, but it always has an unpleasant atmosphere. The garden was overgrown and creepy. The windows that faced it were scratched, cracked, and looked very dirty. The hallway light didn't work, so the entire interior of the living room and hallways connecting to rooms were pitch black at night. The bathroom was just something else. On my first night after speaking to one of my new flatmates, I was told that they have all experienced weird noises. especially scratching on the blackened window in the bathroom. I laugh this off as nonsense. Probably a tree brushing it when it gets windy outside. So, after a couple of weeks, I finally start noticing weird occurrences in the building. My room's window faced the driveway, and I like to keep my curtains closed just because it was the west-facing room, and I didn't like sunlight pouring in and blinding me every day. So I would close the curtains in the morning, head to class, come home, and find the curtains open more than halfway. This happened every day. In fact, I could come home from class, close them again, go out to work, see friends, and come home to open curtains. Yet when I was in the room for hours on end, they never moved when closed. Bit weird, right? My windows were closed and locked, and so was the bedroom door when I was not there. I was the only one with a key, I hope. Also, above me was an attic. No one lived up there. It was a locked storage room, I'm guessing. But at nights I could hear what sounded like foot stomping. 2 people walking around, kids running, and sometimes whispers. Bit freaky, but I thought maybe someone in the house had access to this room and was using it at night. For who knows what. But no one was up there. The room was locked. I would sometimes at night go up the stairs to the door and try and get in to see what the hell was going on in there. But no luck. Never saw anything. But could always hear those footsteps. This part is relevant later on. One of my flatmates was a very religious man. I could hear him pray 5 times a day, and was always very friendly and open to talk his faith, and to listen to me stress about the awful state of the house. But he himself didn't hear or notice anything weird other than the unhygienic state of the place. He decided at one point to head home to Algeria for a few months, with his room locked. New flatmate. After 6 or 7 weeks of living there, one of the other occupants moved out, and a room was available there. I told a friend of mine that was as desperate as I was weeks prior. He moved in within a few days, and things were great. We worked and went to the same uni, so it was cool hanging out with a friend. I told him the stories. Due to his religious beliefs, he wasn't a believer in ghosts, and like me, wasn't fazed by the stories, but he began to notice things too. The same stomping noises upstairs, the scratching windows, my curtains opening on their own. He felt like he was being watched all the time. He noticed the shed in the garden had a broken panel, and could easily imagine someone being inside sometimes watching us in the kitchen when we made food. Routine pest control opened the shed during a visit one day, and found half a dozen dead rats and a pile of hollowed out bees in there. Creepy, but no monsters. My friend and I were eating dinner after work in the kitchen one night. I was facing him in the door to the hallway, whilst he was facing myself in the sliding glass door that gave access to the overgrown jungle garden behind. I remember seeing him turn pale, jump to his feet, and ask me in a very frightened tone, "Can you come to my room?" I laughed and asked why. He said, "Seriously, can you please just come to my room? Please, this is not a joke." He then bolted to his room, like he was running away. I finished my sandwich with the last bite, didn't even think to turn around to see what he was so spooked about. Got to his room, he locked the door, sat on his bed, and turned on his PlayStation. After a few minutes he calmed down and he started playing. He told me he saw something in the garden, a woman in a white dress. She walked across the garden, half a meter from the glass. She almost floated past, and then she vanished. He kept saying, "We have to leave, we have to leave." Noises were one thing, but when you see something, everything changes. My room scared him, and everyone else the most. Another flatmate told us that they thought they'd seen me in my room peering at them on the driveway through a 20-centimeter gap in my curtains one night. They said they saw a shape of a person's head, but I wasn't there that night, or on any of those occasions mentioned, and I certainly don't peer at people through my window. Things get worse. 2 nights after the kitchen incident, I'm woken up at around 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning. My friend is banging on my door in the pitch blackness of the hallway. I open it, and he comes in shaking with fear, saying his bed was vibrating and moving, and he can't stay here any longer. The next day he speaks to a friend, has a place to stay, so he packs up most of his stuff and is gone. Within a few days, another person left. A little creeped out, but mostly annoyed with the poor state of the house. At this point, the last remaining occupants are all looking for alternative living arrangements. Remember the religious guy that went back to Algeria? He's been gone for months now and hasn't returned. The landlord makes a visit one day, and as he has a spare key, decides to inspect the room to make sure it's all okay. He opens it, and we go in. His room was amazing. It was warm, cozy, not damp or cold. It was honestly like a different house. It was nice. My last night there. I decided to move in with my partner, who had avoided this house the entire time I'd lived there, maybe visiting once or twice. She hated it, hated being there, and always felt uncomfortable. On my last night, I again heard weird noises, but this time in the hall. I was aware that I was home alone that night, as the only other flatmate left was on holiday. It was, as was always, very dark when I opened the door. No one there. I walked into the living room, and the window at the back that faced the side of the house was making weird scratching noises. I needed to use the bathroom, and as a necessity, I had to carry a torch to do the job during these hours. I walk into the bathroom, do my business, and as I'm zipping my shorts, my torch briefly shines over the window. I, for some odd reason, looked, as if expecting to see something. I didn't. I walk out of the room, and I don't know why, but I decided to look at that window again without the torchlight. I saw a shape of a large man. I went back to my room, locked the door. All night I heard feet stomping upstairs in the attic. I couldn't sleep, so I moved all my things into a pile in the middle of the room, sat on the bed, and waited for sunrise. I got a taxi in the morning and finally got the hell out of there. You couldn't pay me to go back. I just recently finished a course for a healthcare aide, nursing assistant, certificate, and something really freaky happened to me at the hospice I was doing my practicum at. I want to start off by saying that I don't believe in spirits or anything paranormal, and I haven't had anything happen to me in my life that would change my mind until this particular night. I worked an evening shift that day, and I was done and sent home at 11:30 p.m. I think it was my second last shift until I was done at practicum. I worked on the dementia unit that was on the second floor, so in order to get out of the building, I had to take an elevator to the main floor and walk down a really long, dark, creepy hallway to get to the entrance of the building. Before I go in, I wanted to remind whomever is reading this that the building I was working at was a hospice, so death was quite a regular occurrence there. Anyway, the hallway I had to walk down had rooms on each side with doors that were either opened or closed, depending on the resident's preference. So as you walk by, sometimes you catch yourself looking into their rooms if the door was open. Force of habit being a healthcare aide. Since it was 11:30 at night, the majority, if not all the residents, were sound asleep in their rooms. If the residents decided to sleep with their door open, there's enough light from the hallway to see their rooms pretty well. As I was passing one of the last rooms in the hallway, I looked in and I saw a lady on her bed. Lights off in a cat pose. It stopped me in my tracks. If you don't know what that pose looks like, Google Images will show you what I mean. I thought to myself, that's strange. Her neck and head were awkwardly bent upwards and she was staring right at me. It was so scary. She was an old woman, probably in her 80s or 90s. Her face had absolutely no expression. Her skin looked gray. Her eyes were sunken in, and her lips had a blue and black tinge to them. She didn't look alive, or even human for that matter. Keep in mind, the room was dark with only the lights of the hallway shining in. So this was even more unsettling that this woman was randomly in that weird position, on her bed in the back corner of her room at 12 p.m. at night. I also remember feeling cold. The room had cold air leaking out from it. There was also a smell. A really freaking weird smell coming from that room. Felt like I was in a scene of a horror movie. Like the really scary part that you want to close your eyes but can't. With that being said, the building was a hospice, so a lot of sick and dying people reside in those rooms. Some of which have dementia so odd and strange behaviors aren't rare. I thought to myself, okay, calm down. There's a logical explanation for this. This poor woman is probably suffering from dementia and is confused at the moment. I decided to ask her if she was okay and if she needed help. With a nervously shook voice, I said, "Hello? Are you alright? No answer. I thought the best thing I could do was go grab HCA or a nurse to go assist her and make sure she was okay. I walked back and approached the nursing station. I told the nurse the room number, 304, and what I had saw. We are all very accustomed to seeing strange, bizarre things in this field of work, so there was no need to go into much detail. I think I just said, there's a lady in room 304 that's awake and might need some assistance. The nurse looked at me funny and replied to me telling me that there was no one currently in that room. I thought I may have gotten the room number wrong, so I walked back down the hallway with her to show her the room and told her that was indeed the right room and number. We both looked into the room and the woman I saw was not there anymore. What the hell? Am I going crazy? We turned on the lights. Nothing. Just an empty room with no evidence of anyone living or ever been being there. The room was clean and the bed was made. There was absolutely no indentations on the bed, blankets, or sheets from anyone kneeling on it like that woman was. Surely we would have noticed something. There was only a 2-minute window from the time I left the room and got back with the nurse, and I can assure you everyone who lives at the hospice cannot move that fast, especially in their 80s, to be able to remake the bed and get out of there in time for us to not see them. Initially, I was embarrassed, so we started to think of an explanation. We thought maybe one of the other residents got confused and snuck into room 304. But no. There was no one awake and no one around. At this point, my hairs were standing up on the back of my neck. Everyone was fast asleep, and I was left completely baffled. I didn't even have time to be properly freaked out because I was questioning my own sanity. As we walked away from the room, she told me that the lady who lived in that room passed away the night before. Get this, she said. The poor lady was found in the strangest way, face down in a slumped over cat-like position. No word of a lie, I cannot make this up. It's safe to say that I did not sleep that night. I was so disturbed when I got home. I never wanted to go back. Still to this day, I wonder if that was the spirit of the lady I saw who passed away. I like to say that it could have been my mind playing tricks on me after that long shift at the ward, but I know what I saw. She was there, in the flesh. My whole life I've always felt like I've been haunted. I hear my name when no one is calling me. I feel like I'm being watched in the dark. I often talk in my sleep, and I've scared my friends so much doing it that they have left sleepovers or woken me up terrified. I've grown up past my paranoia, but it used to be bad. I still fall asleep with a nightlight, but until I was 14 I couldn't go to the bathroom at night. I had to cover all my windows, and I would stay up until I passed out keeping watch and making sure I was safe. With all that out of the way, here are a few of my stories. The first house I ever lived in wasn't very old, but it had housed 2 families before us. I only found out last year that someone had hung themselves in the attic before we moved there. My room was on the 2nd floor, and was the only room in the house with access to the attic, besides the garage weirdly enough. My parents had shut off the entrance to the attic, figuring we would never need it, and that it would be dangerous if I got up there as the floor wasn't finished. I might have fallen through. From ages 4 to 9, I would periodically hear this tapping coming from right above my bed. Most nights it was soft, but methodical. 4 taps followed by a break, followed by 6 taps. Then it would stop for a bit. Never happened during the day. It would mostly stop once I woke up my parents or asked it to stop. And it didn't last all night. It would just wake me up and go on for 10 minutes to an hour before I could go back to sleep. I don't know what exact times it was, but I know it wasn't anywhere near 3 a.m. Most likely 11 to 2. At first I assumed birds, or maybe a leak, and ignored it. For a while it just became normal. I got used to it, and would often just use the bathroom when it woke me, then go back to sleep. But one day I mentioned it to my dad offhandedly, and he set out to find the source of this tapping. He barricaded the attic, and found a few dead birds, and a nest with a single egg. The birds were not recent, nor was the egg, but there shouldn't have been a way in for them. He threw them out and looked for water. Nothing. He couldn't find the source. This was 2 years in. By the time I was 8, he had searched 4 more times and still found nothing. He even had a friend who was a carpenter look at it. Nothing. It only deviated from its normal pattern once. 1 week before we moved in. The move was unrelated. My mom had secretly been planning to divorce my dad. No one knew about it until the day we left. But about a week before she planned to leave, I was woken up by the taps again. This time, they were much quicker and louder. Bits of the popcorn ceiling falling on me, and the taps had no pattern, eventually turning into a scraping sound like fingernails on a chalkboard, then stopping. We left later that week and I never mentioned it again. 2 years later, my dad mentioned scrapes like an animal was in our attic, but he passed away before I could ever properly talk about the taps again with him. Then there was the man in the window. By the time I was 12, I was living with my single mother who worked her ass off to afford our tiny home and support me and my 2 sisters. We often went to our grandparents so my mom could have a weekend to relax. My grandparents owned a small farm and home in rural Kansas. Their nearest neighbor was 4 miles away, and the nearest town or city was about 28 miles away. During this period of me going over there twice a month, I began sleeping in the guest room, while my sisters took the basement, which had a pull-out couch. I remember waking up one night to see the window slightly open, which I would never have opened, and a pale face on the other side. I didn't recognize this person, but they had blonde hair, which was medium length, blood on their face, and it looked like their nose had been broken once before and had long since healed. I stared for a long time, while they just looked into my room at nothing. I blinked eventually and they were gone. This happened a few more times before I started sleeping in the living room couch out of fear. My grandparents never really understood why I started sleeping on that uncomfortable couch, but a few years ago, they removed that window in favor of a nice wall to hang a picture on. I'll probably never know for sure who it was, but I suspect it was one of the many people who died in car accidents on the road in front of their house. They lived right by a 4-way intersection, with at least a mile of straight roads going either way. No cops for miles. The perfect road to speed on late at night, and not see the truck coming out of the trees to T-bone you, who also decided to speed. So you both run into each other at 90 miles per hour. There are about 4 crashes per year, and 3 to 4 deaths. I still refuse to sleep in that room. Finally, what happened last night? For context, I've been having night terrors again recently. I used to have them a lot when I was younger, but I thought I'd grown out of them. I told you that I was living with my mom for the past few years, and that's not entirely true. Before 2016, I would spend every other weekend, Tuesdays and Thursdays with my dad. I loved him a lot, and we were pretty close, in our own way. He died when I was 11 in a drunk driving accident. He got wasted and got on a motorcycle, went around a tight curve, and got into the wrong lane. Last night I was doing my normal thing, staying up late and watching Netflix. Around 2:40, I went to brush my teeth and try to sleep. As I looked into my mirror, I saw him behind me, in my room, in his work overalls and bright green shirt, wearing his brown stocking cap. He said something. I heard his voice, but I couldn't understand it. I know it was English. He was clear and not quiet. I just didn't understand what he said. I turned around and nothing. Looked back at my mirror. Nothing. I nearly pissed myself and stayed up the rest of the night, whispering, "I love you," as I got ready to stay up all night. It's now 3:30 the next night. Nothing else has happened, and I'm quite tired, so I guess I'm going to bed now. The house I lived in until I was 8 was haunted. I don't remember seeing anything from this time, and I have tried asking my parents about it, but it makes them uncomfortable to talk about as they're devout Christians, and believe that talking about things like this gives demons power. From what they have told me though, it was mostly things like shadows moving past windows. As babies, my siblings and I would point and cry at nothing. The neighbor's kid once told my dad that he saw a shadowy figure walk through our back fence and into our backyard while he was riding his bike in the school parking lot. My mom once saw my dad walk past the bathroom while she was washing her hands, only to find him laying down in bed. The room was in the opposite direction in which he had walked. When I was either 5 or 6, there was a period of a few months in which I had nightmares every single night. sometimes multiple times a night. Most of these were about a family of vampires living under my bed. I'm not sure if this has anything to do with the haunting though, as they were your standard cheesy horror movie vampires. As I said, we were raised as Christians, and every few months we would go around the house and praise a family and anoint the house in oil. It wasn't until I grew up and we moved away and never did this again that I realized this wasn't just something that Christian families do on a regular basis. Now for the juicy stuff. When I was 12, my sister and I walked across our property to ask the neighbors for something. They were in their 80s and didn't use the front bedroom of their house. However, when we got to their yard, I noticed the light was on in that room and I stopped when I saw someone staring at us in the window. I can't remember if it was a boy or a girl, but it looked down and back up, and suddenly it had swapped genders and hair color. I was silent and frozen with fear, and I turned around to see if my sister saw it too. The little brat had abandoned me and was halfway home. Not that I blame her. We told the neighbors about an hour later, and they didn't believe us. This same year, I was at church on a Wednesday night. My mom ran the bookstore and we were there late one night while she was closing. I was walking past a long hallway that led to the children's classrooms, and I stopped when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I was on one end of the hallway, near the bookstore, and about 30 feet away at the other end of the hall was a humanoid figure that is extremely difficult to describe. That end of the hallway was completely dark. You know how when you're looking into complete darkness, and you stare at one spot, your eyes start to make something out, but when you look away, it's gone? It was like that, except I blinked several times and it didn't disappear. It was made up of what I can only describe as smoke or mist, but it was neither of those things. It was something I had never seen before or since. We stood staring at each other like that for several seconds when it seemed to realize that I could see it. It seemed startled, hopped to the side and behind a wall, and then I saw its two hands and head peek around the corner at me. At this point, I ran to the bookstore and told my mom, and she was visibly freaked out. She finished what she was doing and we left ASAP. As it turns out, while I was in youth group, the pastor had stopped service to pray against a presence that he said he felt. We went to a very charismatic church, speaking in tongues and all that, so it wasn't strange for him to stop service to pray for 20 plus minutes. The thing that always freaked me out the most about this is the fact that it didn't leave, even though the pastor had told it to. The next year, we moved to a new house, and when my sister went to go check out her new room, she ran out screaming and crying, saying that something had touched her. And sure as hell, there was a red handprint on her back. In the same house, my sister and I were standing in the bathroom talking, and she got scared and told me to get out. Apparently, when we were talking, a white mist floated behind us in the mirror. I was looking in the mirror and saw nothing, but I believed her, as she isn't the type to joke around about those things. She takes it as seriously as my parents do. Nothing else weird ever happened in that house. In fact, I haven't experienced anything else anywhere since then, except for my grandmother's house. My grandmother lives in the same city as our first house, and her house is haunted as well. The city isn't famously haunted or anything, so this is almost definitely a coincidence, but it's weird enough that I thought I'd mention it. I'm a 25-year-old Dutch guy. I'm not very easily scared. Never have I believed, nor will I ever believe in events that cannot be explained in some sort of way. And that's why I'm writing this, because maybe someone can explain this to me. As a baby and a toddler, I always spoke of what I called in Dutch, de nappe mennen, translated to the fake men. It was always a group of people, but there was never more than one present at the same time. At least, that is what has been told to me. I can't remember the times I spoke of them, but my mother told me I called them the fake men. In the early years of what I can remember at least. I don't see them anymore. So my parents thought I outgrew the fake men, but over the years, I more and more see some shadows in the corner of my eyes, or I see some dark figures standing in very poor lit places, always standing still, but when I try to focus on them, they disappear. I don't know if they are related, because nobody sees them when I see them, but if anyone knows anything, I'd gladly like to hear about it.